afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today. The House Taxation Committee will come to order. First item of business would be requests for bill introductions. Seeing none, we will move right on into our presentation for today. And we're going to have a report on the Tax Council's, the report on the Governor's Tax Council on tax reform. And I believe I'll welcome first to committee former Senator Steve Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, committee members. It's certainly nice to be here. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about the Tax Council. It's been a fairly long process. We started almost 3 years ago, 2019, and did our final meeting last December. This council was made up of a wide cross-section of people across the state. It included several former legislators, several House members, several senators, a former budget director, a current budget director, some current legislators, 2 cabinet secretaries, and many others. So we felt like it was a good representation across the state. We talked about almost every kind of tax that's levied by the state of Kansas. And we had our priority from day one was to try to do something about food sales tax. So we actually supported the refundable tax credit. We made that recommendation for a couple of years, and then it became obvious that the state's resources were such that we could go ahead and recommend to take the food sales tax off the books. So that's our top recommendation. One of the other thing we had with our council, we had a subcommittee on property tax. Been a lot of interest in property tax around the state. I know a lot of our counties, particularly rural counties, have a sky-high rate in their mill levy. So they did some good work, and I would say that we hope that the state classification system stays in place. That's the only other thing I would say about property tax. And we also had the good fortune of being able to access the research from Donna Ginther. She's a preeminent researcher, one of the best in the United States from the University of Kansas. So we were very glad to have her services. I served as a co-chair on this tax council along with former Senator Janice Lee. And with that said, thank you again for letting us appear before you. And I would turn it over to former Senator Janice Lee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith, Vice Chairman Mason, and Ranking Minority Member Gartner. Thank you very much for providing us the opportunity to have our final report shared with you this afternoon to know a little bit about it. And most of all, thank you all for serving. I spent 22 years in the Kansas Senate and 20 years of those on the Senate Tax Committee. So I understand a little bit of what you all have to do, the work and the research and how much time it takes. So thank you for your service. As Senator Morris said, the council strongly endorses the governor's the food sales tax proposal. It was something that was looked at many of the years when I was in the Senate, but we were never able to bring it about. I'm hoping that it will happen this year. We also very much agree with your closing of the marketplace facilitators loophole last year. That was one of our recommendations, and it helps to expand the sales and use tax that our state is able to collect. We were given the responsibility by the governor to identify goals and performance metrics to achieve effectiveness and fairness, and that's what we tried to do with our research through the years. And one of the things we also very much supported and think is a good policy is a 3-legged stool approach that has been looked at for many years as an appropriate way to look at taxes in our state. And again, thank you very much for allowing our report to be brought to you by Dr. Ginther, who, as Senator Morris said, is an excellent economist and one that we were very privileged to work with. Thank you, Representative Smith.
like they saved the tough stuff for you.
Yeah. I'm Donna Ginther. I'm the Roy A. Roberts and Regents Distinguished Professor of Economics at the University of Kansas, and I direct the Institute for Policy and Social Research. I'm going to give you an overview of a 178-page report on taxation in the state of Kansas. So I'll be presenting the highlights, not every figure or graph. And we're going to start with a comparison of taxation in Kansas and other states, and then talk about income, sales, excise taxes, and property taxes. Property taxes are going to be compared within the state. And then we'll talk about the hypothetical taxpayer approach, where we actually filled out tax returns and looked at the impact of sales, income, and property tax policies on individual taxpayers. And we're going to use that model to compare 2711 and the food tax policy. Before I launch into the report, we love to be interrupted as economists. So if you have any questions, feel free to jump in and I will answer any question you have when you have it. So let's start by looking at Kansas taxation in comparison to other states. So we fall somewhere in the middle in terms of income taxes and in terms of both personal and corporate income taxes. However, sales taxes are relatively high in the state. And since property taxes are local, we're going to do within state comparisons, as I mentioned earlier. One of the motivating factors in looking in the council was the three-legged stool approach. This is a quote from Governor Graves' Tax Reform Council in 1995. The idea being that if you have a diversified allocation of taxation across sales, income, and property taxes, if the economy hits one tax, you have other taxes to kind of hold up that three-legged stool. So it results on lower rates on each tax to reduce the pressure and competitions that other states may have with other types of taxation. And so one of the prime recommendations from the Tax Council was that the three-legged stool be motivating an approach that we use throughout as we think about taxation in the state of Kansas. This policy has been used since the 1990s, and it served the state well. When we've gotten away from that, when we've shortened one leg at the expense of the other, we've had to go back to getting more balance anyways. So if you look at this is a map of the top individual tax rates by state. And if you see Kansas, it's at 5.7%. It's kind of in the middle in terms of taxes with a high tax rate. The lowest personal income tax rate is in North Dakota at 2.9%. And the highest is 13.3%. And I can't see which state that is because it's covered up. Hold on. California. All right. So I'm going to get my slides so I can see them just in case.
I can remove that loss.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So Kansas is at the lower side of the middle on the individual income tax rate. If we look at corporate tax rates, the top corporate income tax rate in the state ranges from 2.5% in North Carolina to 11.5% in New Jersey. In Kansas, the top rate in Kansas is at 7%. If we look at sales taxes, we are on the high side when it comes to sales taxes. Average combined state and local sales taxes in the states in Alaska range from 1.8% to almost 10% in Louisiana. Our combined, according to the this is data on this map is from the Tax Foundation. Our combined rate is 8.7%. But if you look at the next slide, this is taking total sales tax collected divided by total taxable goods. So this is the effective sales tax rate by county. And you see that the county rates are really high. They range from 6.9% in Ness County to 9.7% in Gary County. And using this measure, the statewide average is closer to 8.81% in state and local combined sales taxes, almost 9%. This is another view of state and local taxes. Kansas state and local taxes per capita is the highest in our region. It's higher than the U.S. average. It's higher than Colorado, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, and it's about $1,500 per capita per year. And you see that, there's 6.5% that gives you about $1,100 per capita, and then the rest is local taxes. Colorado and Missouri and Oklahoma have a higher share of local taxes in their sales tax burden. In terms of excise taxes, we've looked at alcohol taxes in the report, but I'll just point out cigarette taxes. In cigarette taxes, we have a somewhat higher rate at $1.29 per pack, and then we add on the sales tax on top of that. DC has the highest tax rate at $4.50, and our neighbor Missouri has the lowest tax rate on cigarettes, which is 17 cents a pack. So are there any questions so far?
Committee, do we have any questions? Representative Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the income tax that you listed, if you can go back to that, but do you have, and maybe you have it somewhere further in, but those are marginal rates, and that's the highest marginal rate that you're listing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. How does that compare with the levels of the marginal rates in other states then? Do you have something that will show us that?
This is comparing the highest marginal rates. We didn't look at an average marginal rate across states, but we do in the report. I don't have it here for you in this presentation, but we compare the average rate in the surrounding states of Colorado, Iowa, Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska. We compare our marginal income tax rates to a U.S. average, per capita income taxes. And we find that Kansas tracks our competitor states. And then in 2012, we have really, really super low per capita income taxes. And then it bumps back up after 2017. So you see a lot of gyration in income taxes over time in the state. But we're in the middle, pretty much. We had higher rates prior to 2012.
What I'm getting at, though, is the income levels at which those rates kick in, because ours is...
I've got more on that later in the presentation, because basically what we find, and I'll show you that when we get to the hypothetical taxpayers, is that Kansas's income tax is pretty flat, whereas the federal income tax is progressive. But if you wait just 5 minutes, I'll show you that in another slide.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Representative Bergkamp?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
So when we look at our total taxes, I guess my understanding is like Kansas, obviously, I think we rank towards the top of all, like our tax burden in general between property sales, income on a relative basis.
No,
like,
we ranked in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
we're square in the middle everywhere.
Okay. So I guess we look at our surrounding states. Would that hold true for like Nebraska, Oklahoma, Missouri?
Right. It depends on which tax you're looking at. The difference between us and our surrounding states is that they rely more on these extra taxes than we do. So there's more licensing fees. And if you think about Colorado, they're bringing in millions of dollars in taxation on marijuana, for example. So we don't have certain taxes. We don't levy certain taxes that our surrounding states do. So they don't have that three-legged stool. And so on one tax, we may look uncompetitive, but they're taxing different items than we are.
And then kind of part of a follow-up would be is like on a maybe per capita basis, like if our, like maybe on the spending side, like how our spending per person relates to other states, or do you guys want to look at like the tax side when it comes to like? We
were not necessarily looking at expenditures. We were looking at different taxes and how they come in. But we are starting to look at expenditures now that all the states in the country are getting the CARES Act money and the American Rescue Plan money. So we're very interested in how the money's being spent. So we've started with the tax side, but, we're thinking about, as at the Institute, of looking at the expenditure side, especially with this new money.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Ginther, if I could ask a question about the slide that is up. How did you calculate, is that an average tax in the county? I'm looking across different counties here. I'm from Wallace County, but
Right.
we don't have any star bonds in Wallace County. But I'm just curious how the rate was calculated. You have different rates for cities, counties, special tax districts.
It was kind of very simple. We took in total taxable sales and then total sales tax receipts and just divided them and got this per capita, got this average sales tax rate.
Okay.
So it's just very simple, as opposed to, because, Johnson County has close to 80 different sales taxes. So you can't really take a weighted average of anything. So we just kind of total taxes in divided by total taxable goods and called it good. But you can see how the rates vary considerably. And the darker blue, the higher the sales tax rate.
Great. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you're on the cigarette tax screen, do we have any idea how much we lose in cigarette sales to Missouri because their rate is so much lower than ours?
I suspect a lot of money. A lot of money. Yeah. Because our sales tax rates are higher. So if we go back here, some of our sales tax rates are higher. You're going to see jumping the border to buy things like groceries, for example. So having a relatively higher sales tax rate in our region will affect how people consume.
Yeah, but it seems to play in our favor in Nebraska.
It does in Nebraska, but our population is on the Kansas-Missouri border and the Oklahoma-Kansas border. Yeah. And so any tax differential, especially with respect to sales taxes, you're going to get. And there's no geographic barrier between those two states in the states. So that's also going to affect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions at this point?
All right.
Seeing none, please continue. Great.
So we've been through this. And now we'll talk about property taxes. Property taxes may become a pressing issue in this state because housing prices have increased by about 15% as of 2021. Housing prices show no sign of leveling off. They might level off when the Fed starts to increase interest rates, but right now it's really hard to find houses. And in Kansas City, it's a 16% increase. In Lawrence, it's a 16% increase. And since our valuations are tied to property values, this may create consternation among taxpayers. And so what we did was we calculated the average mill levy in Kansas by county. And you see that it ranges from 90.2 to 223.8 in Stanton County. Out in western Kansas, the mill levies are relatively high. We can also look at per capita property taxes by county, and this is, it's going to be higher in some counties in the east. They range from $1,000 in Gary County to almost $6,200 in Coffee County, which is home of the Wolf Creek power plant, which increases that. But Greeley County, which doesn't have a power plant, has $6,000 per capita property taxes. So the property tax burden is unequal, and we'll show more of that when we get to the hypothetical taxpayers. One thing to note is that some states have a property tax circuit breaker. 29 states have this. Kansas has it for homeowners, but not for renters. The light blue are Oregon and North Dakota have it for renters only. But with both homeowners and renters, which is the darkest blue, then renters can take advantage of this if they're low income. There was a property tax subcommittee that provided a lot of recommendations in the report. I'm going to go over those rather quickly. I'm just listing them in the next couple of slides. All right. First of all, they recommended an expansion of the homestead property tax refund circuit breaker program. I showed you the map. They also recommended an expansion of the $20,000 homestead exemption from the statewide mill levy, funding LAVTRF to support reduction in local property taxes, potentially expanding local excise taxes as a way to keep property taxes down. So, local governments can levy a sales tax, but if you expand that to cigarettes or alcohol, that may broaden the tax base. There is providing additional funding for the State Board of Tax Appeals, and then there was an update of Senate Bill 13 to make it workable for local governments. And finally, the committee recommended maintaining the state's commitment to its annual fair market value-based property tax valuation system. Deviations from that, like if you think of Prop 13 in California, wreaks havoc for property taxes and creates unfair taxation. So I'm going to switch now to talking about our hypothetical taxpayer model. And this is another recommendation. Is there a question? Yeah.
I just wanted to step back before we go on to the next section and just review those property tax recommendations. Specifically, I was curious on the expansion of the $20,000 homestead exemption. Did the subcommittee have a recommendation on what an appropriate level would be or what the increase?
I believe the recommendation was about $40,000, but I'd have to go back to the report.
And also on the last, well, I guess it's page 2 of those recommendations, update Senate Bill 13 to make it workable for local governments. Were there any ideas on modifications to that to make?
That is detailed in the report,
Okay.
which I have not memorized.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Committee, were there any other questions on the property tax? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the last point, maintain the state's commitment to its annual fair market value. I've often said that the value of something is what somebody else will pay for it, period.
Right.
And so if you have a recent sale, how can something at the end of the year increase exponentially when you just had, and assuming it wasn't like a brother-in-law type deal, but it was an honest buyer trying to pay as little as he can and an honest seller trying to sell it for as much as he can. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't that consideration be weighted more into the formula?
I cannot speak to the specific details of the appraisal formula, but I will say that what we've seen throughout the country and in the state is that there is a shortage of housing stock and there is increased demand. And whenever demand increases and supply is pretty inelastic, like we see in the housing market right now, prices are going up, especially in the urban areas in the state. So that is going to be reflected in these fair market value property valuations in this year.
In February, if somebody paid X for a house, and then when the valuation comes out the following February, and it's gone up in some cases 30 or 40%, then
I'm not aware of prices increasing 30 or 40%, but I would say 15 to 20 would be what the market is showing right now, unfortunately.
Okay.
I mean, it's good for homeowners, but it's in terms of that value, and especially it's a seller's market. So if they want to sell, they can make a killing.
Yeah, but what if they don't want to sell?
Well, then there's, the valuation is going up.
Right.
But, we do have a system where it's pretty straightforward to contest the changes in these assessed values. So as we've built in that capability into our system, so that helps taxpayers.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, and I would like to make the comment that was one of the issues that we tried to address with Senate Bill 13 is as those values, if the values are truly going up across a region, whether it's a city or a county or just a neighborhood, that should reduce the mill levy and hopefully balance out those same dollars. But where you run into discrepancies, and Representative Gartner and I were talking about this morning, if you have some drastic changes in commercial or different classes of property where maybe residential property does see some substantial increases, but perhaps industrial and commercial properties see a decline, then that does place more of the burden on those residential properties.
And you're seeing that with the pandemic.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the county by county graph on property taxes, so west is higher than east.
Mhm.
Is that driven by oil and gas or population or what?
I think it's driven by low population.
Okay, just low population.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, at the beginning of the slide, we talked about the three-legged stool.
Mhm.
Do you have figures on how much of our revenue comes from each of those legs and how balanced they are? Even though I realize the property tax is a local and some sales tax is local, but those
So
three
the
taxes.
last time that calculation was done was 2019, and one of our recommendations is to continue to provide that assessment from our data on tax collections. But the property tax leg is slightly longer. Sales and income tax is slightly shorter. So we're not in perfect, you're never going to be in perfect balance, right? But, if you look at what happened in 2013, right, the income tax leg got sawed off, basically.
But they're not drastically out of balance. They're
The property tax is starting to creep up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Seeing none, please continue.
Okay, great. All right, so the hypothetical taxpayer model, where this is one of the recommendations of the council, was to use this model to evaluate different tax policies, the impact of different tax policies on different types of taxpayers. So what we did was we created 21 separate hypothetical taxpayers by filing status, single, married, head of household, number of dependents, and age. So we have prime age versus elderly. And we filled out the federal tax forms for those individuals. And then taking that federal tax information, filled out the state tax forms and found, so for the sales tax calculations, we went to the survey of consumer expenditures and found how much money they were spending on different items to calculate sales tax burden. And then we put them in different parts of the state. So we have hypothetical households in Johnson County, Salina, Scott City, and then a statewide average to kind of get at the property and sales tax burden. And then we were interested in the progressivity of the taxes. So a progressive tax means that your tax rates increase as your income increases, or the regressivity, where you spend more of your income on a particular tax, the lower your income. So here's the first view of the hypothetical taxpayers. This is the federal and state income tax. For a hypothetical household, we have single, no dependents by income from $25,000 to $100,000, married with no dependents from $25,000 to $150,000. And then once you look at the married to dependents graph. And what you see is the bars fall below zero, and that's a refundability of the federal tax code. So the federal tax code is the dark blue bar, and the light blue is the Kansas tax. And so at the very low income households who are married with two dependents, below $50,000 a year, they're getting money from the federal government, and at below $25,000, they're getting money from the state government. And then at around $80,000, the majority of income taxes are state income taxes, which kind of speaks to the flatness of our income tax. And then if you go up to 100, they're still paying relatively more tax to the state than they are to the federal government. And finally, at 150,000, you see that progressivity of the federal income tax kick in. So you see the increase in the dark blue bars is the progressivity of the federal income tax. And a better way to see it is this. The light blue line in the top figure is Kansas. This is the share of income tax paid by income for married to dependent family. And you see the Kansas line is flat. So there's not a lot of progressivity in Kansas income taxes, even for married households with two dependents. But in the federal income tax code, you see a high degree of progressivity from 25,000 to 80,000, and then it kind of levels off. If we look at married no dependents, you don't get as much of that progressivity. The federal tax code, the slope of the dark blue line is a little steeper, which means the federal tax code is still a bit more progressive. And again, Kansas, for all intents and purposes, has a relatively flat income tax. Representative Smith pointed out that the labels on this figure are wrong. So the light blue should be $100,000 in income, and the dark blue should be $150,000 in income. So we modeled the effect of Senate Bill 50, where we allowed itemized deductions. And a hypothetical Kansas family of four would save between $170 to $230 due to the itemization from Senate Bill 50. But this benefits about 18,000 taxpayers in the state. We also looked at sales taxes, and this is the sales tax on food and other taxable goods. As I mentioned previously, we went to the Survey of Consumer Expenditures and found out how much a household composed of however many individuals with this level of income is spending of their income. And you see that there's an increase in sales taxes paid because the more money you have, the more you spend. So you see a higher increase. The dark blue bar is how much each of these households would spend on food. But we're interested in the progressivity or the regressivity of these taxes. And so you see the top line is all of the sales taxes. And in all of the sales taxes, you see that the lower your income, the larger the share of your total income you're spending on the sales tax in the state. It's close to 8% for a household earning around $20,000 a year. It drops, and it's about 2.5% for food, which is the red line. And as your income increases, the share of your income that you're spending on the sales tax drops. This is the definition of a regressive sales tax. So our sales tax, our low-income households are spending a lot more of their income on the sales tax itself. We then assign people a location within the state, and we assign them a house of a certain value. So the house was of the same value, and then the lower income households had a lower value house, and the higher income households had a higher income house. And you see that the statewide average is about $1,500 per year if you're at $45,000, or if you're earning $150,000, the statewide residential property tax is about $3,500 a year. It's higher in Johnson County because property values are higher in Johnson County, even though mill levies tend to be lower in Salina and Scott City, especially for the highest income housing. If we look at the progressivity or the regressivity of the property tax, on average, Kansans earning around $50,000 a year pay around 3.7% of their income in property taxes. We don't have a $25,000 a year household in this because chances are they're not going to be owning a home. while those earning $150,000 a year pay about a point less, or a little over a point less, of their share of their income on property taxes. Now, the nice thing about the hypothetical model is that we can put it all together. And here's what we've done here. So you have the state income tax, the state and local sales tax, the residential property tax, and then we've also done the vehicle tax. So my colleague actually assigned people a Camry and an F-150 pickup truck in these different locations to get the vehicle sales tax. And you see that we have pretty progressive taxes in terms of, and especially true for households with no dependents. It's steeper increase in state taxes for households without kids. And if you look at the married with two dependents, again, you see at the very lowest income level, they're getting some income back, and that's from the earned income tax credit in the state. So if putting it all together, we looked at the progressivity and the regressivity of the total tax burden in the state. The light blue line is single. The red line is married with no dependents, and the navy line is married with two dependents. And for a single and married without dependents, you have a regressive tax system. So we're taxing our lowest income households. We're taking a larger share of their income in taxes than we are for a married household with dependents. And that taxation for married households with dependents is essentially flat. So I thought that was interesting because, you would think that with the common, I'm pushing the wrong buttons, obviously. With a combination of progressive income tax, a regressive sales tax, and a regressive property tax, it really depends on what your household composition is, how the tax burden falls on you. Okay, are there any questions on this approach so far?
Committee, do we have any questions? Yes, Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this I was hesitating to comment, but I keep going back to what I refer to as the stealth tax of appraised value on ad valorem tax, and I don't know what the committee can do about that. The way or make recommendations the way it's set up currently. But you talk about the stool, and you had said that the property tax leg is getting longer than the others more rapidly, and I think that's the factor more than anything else. And at least with my constituents, they certainly in Donovan County, high property values on farmland. It's very, very, very penalizing type tax, and I don't know if you addressed that really in your report or not. I was listening, but I didn't hear anything about appraised value and how we can cope with that going forward.
Our appraised values are tied to the market, right? And as Representative Smith said, if the appraised values go up and there's no change in what you're going to spend in a local government, then mill levies should come down, right? It may not always work that way because we know that residential property valuations have gone up. My guess is commercial property valuations have not. If anything, they've gone down, especially because of the pandemic. So, it may net out, and it means that that residential property owners are going to be having a higher tax burden, relatively speaking. Property taxes are very complicated, and I would refer you to the report we go through in the very close detail about why our evaluation system is better than alternatives. So, yes.
And I just wanted to clarify, I'm going to have Leah make sure everybody has access to that report. Is that available online, or is it on the governor's website, or?
Soon, right? Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If we can, we're going to get that full report out to everybody so they can have a chance to look at some of the detailed information.
We'll fix that typo that we found.
Okay. Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for preparing this report. It's pretty interesting. A question that may not be totally taxed, but on slide 23,
Okay,
I noticed that if you sit on the porch and don't work at all, you can get near $15,000 in income and tax credits. And that really does not include anything that benefits other state benefits that you get from being low income, does it?
well,
As
so
far as
a lot of this federal,
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
looking at
sir.
that bar that goes all the way down.
yeah, that's earned income tax credit.
Yeah, that's the federal and the tax credits. Basically, that's payments back, correct?
Sorry, the earned income tax credit only goes to people who work.
And I guess where I'm going is I just wonder how much income those people are living on that seemingly, at least on this bar graph, aren't working.
No, that federal bar is working. That's a tax credit to people who work. You don't get the earned income tax credit unless you work.
If I'm looking at the first dark bar going down, I don't know how you can be working and have zero income. Or is that tax over
That's
there?
the
Okay,
so
all
it's a
right.
refundable credit.
Okay, my mistake. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. It's good to point out because no, that's not that's a refundable credit from their working.
Representative Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, this is fascinating. Thank you for all this information. I still am and want to ask the same question on the income tax. You compared marginal rates, different states, but our income tax is basically three levels. It's 30 below, 30 to 60, and 60 and above, correct? In Kansas?
Right.
So if you make 60,000 or you make 600,000, you pay the same percentage.
So you think of it, the median adjusted gross income is around 55 in Kansas. All right. So half of the taxpayers, are not hitting that top rate, and then everybody else is. So that's what makes our income tax flat.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. How does that compare with other states? Because it seems that 60,000 is kind of a low level for the top marginal tax rate. Are other states in that same range?
I think that other states have I would have to go back. We didn't really look at all of the marginal tax rates in the states, but we could very easily do that. I think that other states have more progressivity in their income tax.
And that would explain why you showed that the income tax is somewhat regressive.
Right.
In our state then, because
so the total tax burden ends up being somewhat regressive because our income tax is flat.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Bergkamp?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've touched on this a couple times today with property taxes, but how does inflation factor into this as far as, if we're in a high versus low inflationary environment? Does that disproportionately affect even taxes, low versus high?
Well, since taxes are tied to prices and inflation increases prices, it's going to increase the amount of taxes collected, but the value of that tax dollar is eroded by inflation. So in real terms, it may be lower, right? So we like to adjust everything by the price index and look at real receipts as economists. But the rest of the world doesn't think of it that way and doesn't make the price adjustment in their head. So the sticker shock is going to be, it looks like you're paying more in sales tax and more in property tax because those valuations are going up. But once you control for inflation in real terms, that'll be down. But nobody lives in real terms except for economists.
Thank you.
Committee, any further questions? Let me check online, make sure. Seeing none, you may continue.
All right. Great. So we decided over the weekend to use our hypothetical taxpayers to look at the food sales tax. Senator Lee and Senator Morris have both told you that the highest priority recommendation coming out of the Governor's Tax Reform Council was in support of the Governor's Axe the Food Tax proposal. And so I'm going to do a little bit of, I've submitted written testimony to your committee on multiple occasions and to the Senate Tax Committee, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the food sales tax. 13 states tax food. Kansas has the second highest sales tax on food in the country, and that's the state level. It doesn't include that 2 to 2.5% local tax as well. And as I've shown you, sales taxes are regressive and food sales taxes are regressive. And so House Bill 2720 eliminates the state food sales tax, and it saves a family of four an average of about $500 a year. More now that inflation, especially for food prices, has gone up. And so we want to deal with, also take a look at House Bill 2711 that cuts the food sales tax to 3.5% in the first year. It has a provision to exclude candy and soft drinks and bottled water. It has a refundable tax credit of $125 per exemption if your total income is less than $30,615, and you have dependents, are disabled, or above the age of 55. And that credit is available until the food tax is completely eliminated. This also not the food tax. The overall, the food tax will be reduced 1.2% per year as long as the stabilization fund is more than $100 million. It also reduces the state sales tax to 6.3%. So we're going to analyze the impact of House Bill 2711, where you have a 3.5% cut and the refundable credit, assuming no additional cuts in 2023. And we're going to look at our married hypothetical taxpayers. So this is the actual spending that we got from the Survey of Consumer Expenditures. And what we did is we reduced food expenditures by 7.37% to account for expenditures on soft drinks and candy. So you take, I was surprised by that number, 7% on soft drinks. Anyway, so a hypothetical taxpayer earning $25,000 will spend $7,250 on food and about $15,000 on other taxable items. And so this is a list of, so the highest income, they spend more. They spend about $9,500 on food and about $36,545 on other taxable items. And this is from the Survey of Consumer Expenditures. And then we adjusted, when we looked at the effects of 2711, we adjusted food expenditures. We took 7% of food expenditures out of food and put it into other taxable items. So we shifted that for those hypothetical taxpayers. All right, and then we compared them to the current situation where we have a 6.5% tax on food, which is the dark blue bar. And then you have the Axe, the tax policy, which is 0. And in 2023, you see a negative medium blue bar for 25,000 income with 2 dependents, and that is the refundable tax credit feeding through. And you see that the dark blue bar is a little lower for 25,000. That's our non-refundable tax credit. That's the net effect of the non-refundable tax credit. So you see the dark blue bar shows you're spending between $450 to $600 on the food sales tax, depending on how much income you have. And the House Bill 2711 cuts it. It's a little more than half. And the lowest income households benefit from the refundable tax credit, but the other households are still paying the regressive food sales tax. We looked at, so that's married with 2 dependents. We looked at the same sales tax for a single person household, and they don't benefit from the refundable credit. And you see that they don't spend as much on food either. So low-income households, if you're a single earner, do not get the benefit. And then we're going to look at that 0.2 percentage point decrease in the overall sales tax. So what is the effect of that on the sales tax burdens? And what you see is that we're going from 6.5 to 6.3. Suppose a household spends about $10,000 on taxable goods. Under current law, the sales tax would be $650. Under HB 2711, the sales tax would be $630. That's about a savings of $20. And you see that the sales tax burden from HB 2711 in 2023 is slightly lower, but for a low-income household, it's about $30, which is that little bar on the right, and for a high-income household, it's about $73. So this doesn't provide as much sales tax relief as the food tax proposal. I'm going to take questions here, and then I'll conclude. Any questions on the different food tax policies?
I'm not seeing any questions, so please continue. Oh, yes, Representative Bergkamp.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On slide 36, I think this is maybe the first chart with the married household 2 dependents.
Right.
So this one would show like a progressive tax with the 2711 House bill. Is that correct?
It's not so the reason that you have a higher tax burden is that people with higher incomes spend more on food.
I guess this doesn't look at the portion related to their income. It's just the total.
Yeah, it's a total. So if you took 619 and divided it by 150,000, it would be a smaller number than 456 divided by 45,000.
Yeah. Okay.
So you would see the regressivity if you did that calculation. But yeah, the higher your income, the more you spend on food.
Okay.
And different types of food.
Representative Kelly.
Mr. Chair, Professor, thank you very much. A question for you, and I've wondered this when you look at eliminating the food sales tax completely instead of in steps, whether there was any talk or thought of what would happen. Well, you could go back to the 2012 tax plan where you had to back up on things. The difficulty of going from zero back up versus the ease of going a step. And then if things work out great, you drop down farther. If you hit into a reversal, you can just hold it steady and not have to back up and start adding tax back on, like has happened sometimes in the past.
So 2 points on that. First of all, what happened with the pass-through exemption of the Brownback tax cuts is that a lot of, and research shows this, a lot of people reorganized their businesses to take advantage of not paying any tax on pass-through income. So our tax estimates didn't account for a behavior change. If we eliminate, we know, because we collect sales taxes on food, we know how much money consumers are spending on food. We know it. So you're not going to get a behavior change like you did with the Brownback tax cut. So the fiscal note is about $450 million right now for the food sales tax. People are not going to adjust their behavior to that tax change. The second thing I would point out, sales taxes, we had an increase in 2010 and sales taxes were supposed to come down. I've never seen the phases actually. There was the glide path to zero income tax. That phase didn't happen. So you've got, by doing the phase, it's easier to keep a tax on food in the longer run than if you eliminate it. So those are my 2 arguments about the ratchet versus the full elimination. We know how much it's going to cost, and it's not going to deviate that much because we already tax food. And the second being that if we, depending on how tax policy goes, we may, 2 or 3 years from now be in a shortfall, and then it'll be harder to adjust that food sales tax down. One thing I didn't mention, but we do discuss in the report, and I have in my submitted written testimony, is that if you eliminate, so Keegan O'Connor, who now works for the Kansas Department of Revenue, was my graduate student. He got his PhD in economics at KU. And he studied the impact of the food sales tax on food insecurity. Food insecurity being that, you skip meals or you buy, beans and rice to feed yourself, right? And he found that states that reduced the food sales tax had a 39% reduction in food insecurity. And that's meaningful difference because kids who are in food insecure households can't learn, have behavior problems. And so, you can think of the food sales tax reduction as an investment in food insecurity and food security, which will have positive longer term benefits for very income constrained families.
So if things turn around and we are back to a deficit, which we probably certainly will be if history repeats itself, would one of the other two legs grow longer or both grow longer, and the sales tax, if it stayed low?
I mean, one of the issues that we didn't really touch on, there's two issues. All right, so one of the things that we did, that the legislature did last year and that we recognized in the report, is that you closed the marketplace facilitators loophole, right? So you expanded the tax base, and by expanding the sales tax base, it gives us an opportunity to lower the rates, which is what any good tax economist would say you should do. So, if one of the things that the state could do to help itself would be to look at sales tax exemptions. Now, those are really hard to get rid of, but the broader your sales tax base, the more money you're going to get in. And so one of the things we talk about in the report is, I can buy a physical book on Amazon and I pay 6.5% tax plus Lawrence Douglas County tax. All right. If I buy that book for my Kindle, I pay no tax. Right? Here's an opportunity to, if you're concerned about paying for the food sales tax, my advice would be start to tax digital goods because the future will be digital goods. How many of you went to Blockbuster and rented movies at Blockbuster and you paid tax every time you rented, right? That videotape that you brought home, right? You don't pay tax on your Netflix or your Amazon Prime, right? So if the committee is concerned about paying for the food sales tax, one way to deal with that is to broaden the base.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, please continue.
Okay. Well, so historically, the state has tried to balance sales, property, and income taxes, the three-legged stool. Our income taxes are somewhat lower, and our sales taxes are significantly higher. Property taxes are a mixed bag. It depends on where you live. Given the sharp increase in housing prices, property taxes are going to become a pressing issue to this body. You're going to hear about it. And we'll point out that the report indicates that Kansas does not have a property tax circuit breaker that includes renters. So we've demonstrated our hypothetical taxpayer model that shows, and we used it to compare House Bill 2711 and House Bill 2720. This demonstration showed that low-income households benefit more from the refundable food tax credit. However, the reduction in the sales tax to 6.3% does not provide a lot of income sales tax relief. It's around 50, between $30 to $70, average around 50. We find that the elimination of the food sales tax would provide more. And so we really appreciate your time, and it's been a pleasure to talk with you all. You talk more to me than my students do, which is great. So if you have any additional questions, I'm happy to take them.
Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much for the presentation. When I started having an interest in government, I started listening to, and in fact took some classes from Mike Carter, Glenn Fisher. Also, I started paying attention to what the Hayden administration, the Finney administration, and the Graves administration were saying about the food sales tax. At that time, and uniformly, all of these individuals said that reducing the sales tax on food weakens our three-stool model, because sales tax on food is such a predominant part of our sales tax. Now,
Can I stop you there?
okay,
Food as a share of expenditures has dropped considerably. So the amount of money we spend on food as a share of our, so the poverty rate set in 1963, is 3 times the budget of food. That's how the official poverty line is set. If you did, that is not how we spend money today. We don't spend it, food prices have dropped considerably, and it's a smaller share of expenditures. So while it may have been true in the 1990s that having food in the sales tax base was important for stabilizing those 3 legs, it's not as true today.
Eddie, do you have the figures? Or could you provide the figures as to the percentage of food in the sales tax in
It's
the 90s?
15%.
Pardon?
15%.
15%?
Yeah. And in the 60s, it was twice that. So it's gone down over time.
Could I still get it from research? Thank you.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Found it very edifying. Appreciate all the work that the council has done. This is very similar to a question that was asked earlier regarding what percentage of cigarette purchases were bled out to other states. And as someone who represents a border district that has grocery stores in it and has constituents that shop there, I know that my constituents are buying their groceries in Missouri, because anyone with any sense would be doing so. Do we have any sort of similar numbers for crossover grocery purchases, in particular to Missouri?
So the Economic Research Service that relocated from Washington, D.C. to Kansas City has scanner data. So they have panel data on every purchase, grocery purchase. However, I don't think that I could access those data and look at the cross-border phenomenon. I could email one of my contacts there and see if we could actually dig into the data and figure out how many people from Kansas buy their groceries in Missouri. That would be the source of the data, but that data may be sufficiently confidential and anonymized that I wouldn't be able to do that with those data. But that would be one way to answer that question. Another way to do it, that's a hard problem without tracking people's credit cards.
Yeah, because I think right now it's just mostly anecdotal, and I believe in privacy for our constituents, but I also feel that it would be very important for us to see just how much we're bleeding over there. Not to make a bad bleeding Kansas pun, but like, how can I avoid that at this point? So, and plus, this isn't just an issue for our constituents, but also for our grocery store business owners as well. So I really appreciate this, and if there is any way that we can get similar numbers somehow, either from research or from the tax council, or if there's a study that you all can do in the future that doesn't violate privacy, I'd be really into that. Thank you.
As the representative from the other side of the state that lives a mile from the border, I experienced that too with Colorado and Nebraska both being zero. But another interesting perspective on this is a lot of Kansas residents don't go over to Colorado because the base price is a lot higher too. I'm not saying there isn't any that don't cross over, but that's also something to take into account if we can quantify that or look at it is the base price difference as well. But Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. On slide 41, we're talking, you're making a recommendation that our income tax are lower in other states, but our sales tax is higher. You did not make a recommendation on property taxes. Do you have one? You address it a little bit in 41 where you want it at local level. And it seems like local level, I support that, but I've also found out when it doesn't work at the local level, the next level phone call is usually us.
Right.
And so, and also a question on the property tax circuit breaker that includes renter. Can you, or does not, can you kind of explain that?
Well, so a property tax circuit breaker says that, you're not, it kind of gives you a compensation for paying, if you're low income. Yeah, it kind of pays you back for the property tax burden. Our renters, who are the lowest income on average, don't get a benefit from the property tax circuit breaker. And so if we're trying to help the lowest income households, that would be one consideration, would be to provide, we had that prior to 2012. So,
Okay, thank you for that. And I live 6 miles from the Oklahoma-Kansas line, and I see truckloads of cigarettes coming back from our Native American sales in Oklahoma that is a way lower taxes. And so, I support a broad base, but, we've got so much competition. People will drive to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, which is about 20 some miles from my house. They will eat, and consistently, even though their fuel tax is about the same as Kansas, their price on gasoline and diesel is significantly less. I mean, anywhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 cents per gallon, which makes a nice outing to go eat out and buy some groceries at a lower rate and fill your gas tank or fuel tank. When you got a 40 or 50 gallon diesel tank, I mean, that's $200 now. Boom, that's a big savings. So we've got a lot of that, those border states and those communities that are right on the line are really facing some tough competition. And somehow it would be nice to address that. I know we've had several bills in the past where if you live within so many miles of a line and, you could have some benefits on fuel. I know that was a bill there, but, it's a huge issue and we're bleeding a lot. In reality, we are. Thank you for that.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions, if I may. Did you look at the effect of maybe lowering the overall sales tax rate versus just the food and how that would impact families?
We did not do that, but it's pretty straightforward to do. We could do it tonight. Because we have the consumption expenditures, and if you just say, how much are you going to lower the tax? But, you could do it back of the envelope with, say, $20,000 in taxable expenditures. If you lower the tax to 5.5%, by a percentage point, this is how much you'll save, right?
And then second question, kind of on that note, will lowering the food sales tax to zero benefit, I guess, the wealthier individuals more than the lower income as far as how much they would save on a growth, more of a gross percentage?
Yeah, in a level, yes, it will benefit them more because they spend more on food. As a share of their total income, it won't really make a difference in their well-being, whereas it'll make a big difference in the well-being of a low-income household.
And that's right. I'm just trying to reconcile in my mind. How do we balance that as far as the low income versus the benefit to the high income?
Right. I mean, the benefit to the low income household is greater in terms of they're spending a larger share of their income.
Yeah, but they just don't have, every dollar is going to be amplified because you're such a small number compared to.
Right.
But thank you.
And now, Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, there are a lot of us here that were here in 17 when we rolled back the LLC or the S chapter corporation deduction, and that the S chapter corporation deduction. And your points were well taken. I was listening carefully when you talked about the fact that actually grew after it was repealed in 13 because a lot of people signed up to be S chapters. And I recall the figures were bannered around about how much that really cost us. But I think in hindsight, coming in when I did, we were all affected by that because we had to roll it back, and we were, in a different place, big different place than we are now. We're $1.2 billion in debt, as I recall. And I have a folder full of cards about the largest tax increase in the history of the state of Kansas, as do many other legislators here. So your report, while it's excellent, doesn't bear in mind the optics of the politics of that as we repealed that in 17. And it was something that is sort of, I think, there all the time with us. And that's why we talk about gradual reduction versus axe the tax methodology. And I guess what I learned today, and I think it's important for the committee to bear in mind, is this isn't something that's going to grow. It's a fixed amount. I mean, it's roughly $400 to $500 million, $440 million is what I've seen, depending on your definitions that you use. And of course, right now we can afford that. But I think we're all affected by the optics of, in the out years, where will we be with this? And would we be able to put it back in part if we needed to, in respect to the three-legged stool? And so what I guess I'm saying is you just need to understand that that's why we're considering those two variations, and why it's hard to go all the way when you consider what happened in 17 and then the results, the political fallout from that, because it was pretty significant. And the other thing that I learned that I thought was interesting is that as we broaden the base with marketplace facilitators on sales tax, I think that also gives us some place to go as far as lessening the amount overall of the sales tax by getting rid of the sales tax on food all at once. I think we'll have more capacity to do that now based on the fact that we have done that last year. I think that'll be helpful. But I think a lot of us are still going to struggle with going from 6.5 to 0 on one component of tax in the next 3 or 4 months. I think that's tough. And just wanted to make sure you understood that for all of us that were here at that time. Thank you.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, just to sort of offer a counter to that and to speak to some of the things that were said earlier, I think as we look, one of our big discussions when we talk about making tax cuts, which theoretically, from a political standpoint, we should all like doing that. I love voting for some tax cuts myself. But I've noticed that some of the arguments that we have against it is that for whatever reason, somehow wealthier individuals somehow do not deserve to have a reduction in the food sales tax. And I represent some of the more wealthy contingent in this state. And I would say that there really isn't that much of an issue. Why is it okay for us to reduce food sales tax for those who deal with poverty more, and yet do our wealthy constituents not need to have their sales tax on brie and caviar reduced? Everyone eats. We all had different habits. And I think that one of the things that, again, and that's why I'm really looking for the Tax Council to hopefully make this sort of study, is to see how this is really affecting, again, our businesses in our border areas, because this isn't just about who does and who does not deserve a tax cut. We seem to have no problem giving tax cuts to the wealthy when it comes to income and property tax, but not when it comes to food. And so I want us really looking at the overall benefit to our businesses and to how that works, even from the standpoint of restaurants and those sorts of purchases as well. So getting away from that philosophy as to who does and who does not deserve what type of food sales tax under different circumstances. So again, looking at the business implications of food sales tax cuts, I really want us to see that, because I think that a quick reduction will help a lot of businesses that are flagging due to a lot of our COVID restrictions, and sort of, inject a little adrenaline into that economy. I can't believe I went there. Totally did.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you are aware, in 2019, the legislature passed a food sales tax cut, and then it was vetoed. And my understanding is it was vetoed then, but supported now is because conditions on the ground have changed significantly in 3 years. So what are those conditions that have changed that make that desirable today that didn't make it desirable 3 years ago?
The state general fund is flush. The state general fund has a lot of money in it. And, the past 18 months, we had the downturn from COVID in March of 2020, and things looked really dire for about a quarter. And then tax receipts beat everybody's expectations wildly for the past year and a half. So, and then you have additional support for the state government coming from the federal government. So we have an opportunity to make targeted tax expenditures where we change how we tax ourselves going forward because we have the money. And estimates, the fiscal notes that I've seen show that we can pay for it.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the questions that while you're there is, you notice that some states like Tennessee and Florida, they are growing dramatically in population. They have different taxes than we do. It seems with Kansas shrinking as fast as it is, and it is shrinking. Would you have any suggestions if you could change the tax policy here to make people want to come here and retire here and bring a business and a family?
Well, we tried that, didn't we, in 2012? We tried changing our tax policy to, get more people to come to the state. And in the decade between 2010 and 2020, we grew slower than any of the surrounding states. Now, I think that's a really open question of why is Kansas growing more slowly? If I had to guess, and I have no data behind this, I think it has to do with immigration. Because, we had leadership in the state that was against immigration, concerned about illegal immigration, and that may have depressed the number of people coming to the state. That is a guess. It's not, I have no data behind that. But if we look at, what's different than us, we tried cutting taxes, that didn't work, right? We do have a lot of young people in the southeastern part of the state. So we have, more children in southwestern part of the state. We have a lot of children, and that's a good thing. But I think that the governor and the legislature should look into why didn't Kansas grow? Because Nebraska, which is much smaller, grew. Oklahoma, of course, grew. And Missouri, we beat Missouri. That's it. I mean, in terms of growth.
Well, you've got probably over 90 counties that's lost population, including Shawnee in the last 10 years.
Well, one of the reasons why Shawnee County lost population is because the size of the state government got cut, and those people left. If you look at what happened just look at the Department of Labor, lost over 150 staff, right? And there were large cuts to the size of the state workforce in the last decade that affected Shawnee County disproportionately.
Well, my goal, I think, would be to grow this state and not try to grow the government. I think you can't spend yourself into prosperity or tax yourself that way. And I've lived here all my life, and it seems like you think this county, with being where it's at, would be able to have a little bit of growth.
Well, the public sector employment is the largest share of employment in the state. If you look at agriculture, if you look at 100 years of agricultural employment, what's going to happen when farmers adopt driverless tractors like John Deere has? What's going to happen to the demand for workers when you can? I mean, I showed the commercial from John Deere on the phone to my class about this is the future of technology. It's going to destroy jobs. So how are we going to create more jobs in this state? Well, we have agriculture, which isn't going to hire a lot of people. We have a skilled manufacturing workforce. We have natural resources in terms of energy, renewable energy. This state can be a leader in providing renewable energy. So if you think about the future of growth in this state, you should be looking at the sectors where we have a comparative advantage. I was out riding my bike on Saturday. It was so windy, it nearly blew me off the street. I mean, that is power, right? And that low energy costs will attract manufacturers, right? Because, if you can get, lower energy, you can get server farms or other high-tech industries coming to this state. So as a state, we need to think about what our comparative advantage is. Another thing I always like to say about economic development for the state, we don't have mountains, we don't have the ocean, but we have a great education system, we have relatively low costs of living. We should be the place where families come to raise their kids, full stop. I mean, that's why Johnson County is so strong as an economic powerhouse, because people want to go there, raise their kids in Johnson County because the quality of life is good. If we could make investments in the state to make this a family-friendly state where we have the great education, lower housing costs, good high-skilled manufacturing jobs, our economy will take off. So that's how I view, as from an economic development perspective, how the state should think about. It's not, one thing you should take away from this is that those tax cuts, they don't pay for themselves. What the state needs to do is think about, now that you've got all of this spark money, how are you going to invest that money into building the state for the next 20 years? We did a study at IPSR that showed that 1 million state residents have inadequate broadband. Now, you're getting all this money from the CARES Act and Spark Act, but if you want to attract workers, you need broadband. Those investments need to be made. So you need to think about not only taxation, but how you can target your expenditures to make this state attractive.
Committee, in the interest of time, I'll have one more question. That's Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick. First of all, many of us here have seen plenty of economic studies that tax policy is not the primary driver of people coming to a state. It ranks about third, fourth, or fifth in that range, but it does have an effect. So if we were to, let's say that hypothetically we would eliminate the sales tax to zero on food, we lose $450 million. And in a year or two, the economy starts to slide and we need that money back. Is there eliminating the sales tax on food would be a progressive tax move, correct? Is there another progressive tax move we could use to make up that, assuming we would have to, even though revenues are coming in way above estimates right now?
Well, I mean, a couple things. As I mentioned, you could expand the sales tax to digital goods because those are going to become more and more important. So tax that electronic book on Amazon at the same rate that you're taxing the physical book. And so that would be one opportunity. You mentioned the fact that the income tax is, the top rate kicks in at $60,000. So, you could adjust that rate, make it more progressive, perhaps. So that would be another option as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Dr. Ginther, thank you so much for presenting this information it's a cumulative amount of a lot of data that we really appreciate. I'm a visual guy, so seeing the graphs and charts really makes things stand out, gives a better understanding of all of it. But thank you for your time. Thank you, senators, for coming and joining us today. We really appreciate your input.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And if anybody wants to follow up, I'm at dgunther@ku.edu. Happy to set up a time to talk or respond to your emails.
Thank you. Committee, that concludes our business for the day, and we are adjourned.